Once digital transformation starts, it never ends. The owners were ready for digital transformation. Top management was ready, and everyone wanted it, but the market was not ready.
Stepping out of the comfort zone.
We, like any board, started asking uncomfortable questions. And what are the expectations? And how is this transformation period supposed to go? Where do we get the money?
Where are the additional sales?
Digital transformation and digitalization today are the most optimal path to overall business joy and happiness.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Board of Directors channel with Sergiy Bulavin. Today we are hosting Armen, Kurginian and Dmytro Kozlov. Greetings to everyone. Today we will discuss topics related to digitalization and digital transformation. These topics are very popular and trendy lately among business owners, top management and boards of directors. And that's why I'm sure each of us has something to say, to share our thoughts which could potentially be useful for our listeners.
Sergiy, thank you for bringing up this topic. The topic is actually very relevant. And in all the boards where we currently have the honor to participate, in one form or another, digitalization and digital transformation are on the agenda. In other words, they're on the table. So it will be very interesting to hear colleagues' thoughts.
I agree. Let's get underway.
In general, digitalization and digital transformation are different things, and if we immerse into these concepts, we can distinguish what sets them apart. The concept of digitalization usually refers to some narrow projects, while digital transformation is something more global, related to the company's strategy.
I would put it differently. I've made a distinction for myself. Digitalization is the digitization of existing business processes or existing company products, the existing company frameworks. And transformation is when changes in these approaches or business processes are specifically driven by the integration of some IT tools or digital instruments. Therefore, if we're talking about a company that is undergoing change, that has some kind of strategic plan, then probably it is digital transformation that better fits the process of change. What do you think?
I agree with you. I will expand on what Armen said. In my opinion, Supervisory in Ukrainian or digitization in English are synonyms from my point of view. They are more focused, as Armen said, on the automation of internal business processes and more oriented toward addressing internal needs, internal issues, needs, improving efficiency, and so on. And digital transformation, which should be an integral part of a company's strategy, is a more comprehensive change in business processes through the use of information technologies, which is usually outward-facing, including changes in approaches, changes in sales, changes in how we sell, changes in what we sell, and so on. Sergiy, you said that digital transformation should be part of the company's strategy.
Or the strategy should be part of the transformation. The world is changing so quickly now that it's unclear what comes after what. What matters more, what matters less?
Well, and digitalization also has to be connected to the strategy in some way. That is, it might not be strategic, but rather a more tactical concept. In other words, these are separate projects. For example, the implementation of some kind of accounting system. Is that digital transformation or digitalization?
It depends on the outcomes the business expects. If it's just replacing one system with another, for example, like now, there's one C which everyone is looking to replace with something else and painlessly. If the new system provides some additional impetus for development, some strategic changes, then it's part of digital transformation. For example, if the accounting system is part of a global ERP, for example, yes.
And I would put it differently. I'd say that if we go back to 1C, replacing 1C with some other platform, that's digitalization, not digital transformation. And here, nothing really changes for the company, essentially, right? We're taking the same processes, just switching the system. Even implementing a CRM, for example, from my point of view, it's more about digital transformation, but still, it can be part of the digitalization of existing business processes if you're not introducing anything new. But, for example, if we switch 1C to SAP with additional features, then that would already be part of a digital strategy, a digital transformation.
Okay, all of us, as board members, work at the strategic level. And of course, people agree with us. Digitalization projects as well, because as a rule, these projects require some funding for implementation. But still, as board members, we focus on digital transformation and the overall company strategy. What examples can we give? Examples of such digital transformations that have significantly impacted a company's business model.
You mean in general?
Well, in general, the environment that surrounds us. Well, for example, the transition. Dmytro and I were on the board of a company that operated in the mice industry and which faced global challenges during the pandemic. MICE, meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. Of course, during the pandemic, it was impossible to hold them in the usual format. During the strategic planning and search for a way out of this situation, the board, jointly with top management and the owners, came up with the idea that we needed to focus on digital products. So, is this digital transformation or digitalization?
I believe it was digital transformation because it changed the way the company works with external challenges, clients, and so on, because it's a completely different business model, and it was a strategic decision in response to the challenge of the pandemic. I would say that this is a digital transformation.
So I might say that transformation differs from simple digitalization in terms of its goals and the consequences it brings. That is, if the goals actually change how the company interacts with external stakeholders, then it's closer to a transformation. But I'd like to give another example. If you remember, we were on the board of a company where the board put on hold the digital transformation. And at the time, it seemed to us, and still seems, that it was justified when the company we joined as a board was at the stage of digital transformation, when sales were, let's say, live sales involving real-life managers in the field, had to be quickly transformed into sales through an application. In other words, to somehow quickly shift to online sales. And then, one way or another, the company continued moving in this direction, but the board, well, it can't be said that the board obstructed it, but the board, along with the owners, decided to proceed gradually, meaning to gradually phase out or reduce the role of live field managers while adding online sales tools. That is, this transformation was slightly extended over time, thanks to the board. And this is an example where the board not only doesn't just support radical changes, critical changes right here and now for tomorrow, but instead makes the process a bit more balanced. Evolutionary, yes, and more balanced in my opinion. Yes, because in this situation, the owners were ready for digital transformation.
That is, the management was ready, and everyone wanted it, but the market was not ready. And because of that, the board decided to slow down the process a bit so as not to abandon the things that are useful and can provide both additional sales and immediate benefits under the current market conditions, while still looking a bit ahead.
Well, we know that speed doesn't always mean good. The market wasn't ready, but maybe it's not just the market that was unprepared. Maybe the company wasn't ready either, lacking expertise, missing professionals, because I think that for most people, the approach is like this. We want to implement something. All right, so the IT guys, we want to implement a CRM. Go ahead and implement it. But we both know at the very least that it doesn't work that way, because IT alone can't implement business systems, even if they're involved. A simple example, right? The terms of references, who's supposed to write it? Is it the business side that should write it? Can the business write it? That's a big question. Is the business ready? Does it have the expertise to systematize everything they want? That's why IT can help here, facilitate in some way, but it's a joint effort of all parts of the business, including IT, and you need to have IT at the very least.
Well, yes, and in such a situation, of course, the term of references will be revised every time. They will be constantly changing. And essentially, at the beginning, if the client doesn't have a full, detailed understanding of what the product should be, what the end result should look like, there's a very high likelihood that the product will turn out completely different, potentially addressing entirely different needs than those that actually emerge in the product.
A high likelihood that it won't work as intended.
Yes, Armen, but thank you very much for the reminder. That was digital transformation you upside down? Digital transformation, or later digital detransformation.
Come on, why are you saying so? Well, it was digital transformation. You added business sense to the digital transformation, right? Then when is it needed? Why is it needed? Do we have the resources and so on? Well, like a regular business plan for any project.
Yes, we, like any board, started asking uncomfortable questions. What are the expectations? How should this transformation period go, from abandoning one type of sales to moving to another? And there weren't really any answers. Unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, there wasn't even a terms of references they were working on.
It kept changing constantly.
Yes, as often happens. And the board insisted at the time that it should be done gradually. I just had an interesting thought, like a thesis that could say that once digital transformation starts, it never ends, because it's constantly changing, or rather, not just changing, but new elements are being added. Since this market moves very fast and competitors aren't standing still, new elements are constantly being added, which then continuously impact either the website or the application. And in this way, the transformation continues, meaning it's impossible to stop it as long as we're alive, and it even seems like it will go on for a long time in the digital world.
That's very interesting because there are other approaches, for example, Lean, Lean Six Sigma, Kaizen, which actually operate at the level of a company's values. In other words, they influence the company's philosophy and its culture. Exactly, and most likely, digital culture will also lead to continuous changes related to digital products, digitalization, and digital transformation. In other words, it can be an ongoing process.
I think it's already happening. Well, let's put it this way. Digitalization started 10, 15, 20 years ago when the first ERP systems appeared. We talked about how it changes the internal culture. I think that even within a relatively small company, the way different types of automation or digitalization of certain processes are perceived will vary greatly. At one point in the company where I worked, we were implementing SAP. A large system, it was replacing GDDR, which was still black and white.
Big, really very foreign company.
It was a small foreign company, but on the scale of the organization, there were 40,000 employees worldwide. There were several areas covered by SAP, and it was already at some stage of implementation. At that point, I was working on preparing a base for training primarily of financial departments. If anyone has ever seen SAP, it's a classic German-developed software. But the peculiarity of German software is that it's designed by engineers. It's not for the user, not at all. But I don't remember how many menu items there were in our case. There was something around 400 or 500. They were divided into branches. You know, menu, 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 and what was done. Each menu item also had its own numbering. If you wanted to go in, dig in, and see some transaction between you and the supplier, and then you wanted to go back and look at something else, if you remembered that number 3, 2, 5, 4, 8, then you'd immediately land on the right item of the menu. And to me, it seemed impossible. That was going to be very difficult. Sell is a bad word because the system had already been implemented. But how do we sell it to our people? That was the question. And when we started the training, day 1, 2, 3, then I asked, how do you like the system? Listen, it's so good, so great. And we especially like this numbering system. I've already memorized all these numbers. I jump between transactions and menu items using these numbers. When I was leaving the company, I didn't remember a single number. What I mean is different employee profiles, and finance in particular, have completely different expectations. She got it. The rest just didn't get it then and still don't. It was quite difficult.
Dima, that's very interesting. At the time you were leading, were you still the CIO or head of the information office for that company in the region?
Yes, I was the regional CIO. It included, well, the CIS countries, the Baltic states, and the former Yugoslav countries.
Did you notice a difference not only by profession or specialty, for example, accountants or finance people being different from salespeople when implementing SAP, but also between countries?
Well, maybe I wouldn't say that. It was noticeable. Which office opened first, where employees had been working long?
They remembered more numbers.
And that was really good. Well, and they were more conservative. And in those countries where we established the office later, for example, well, the Ukrainian one was one of the oldest offices. There, some things were simpler.
Okay, and if we go back to the board of directors level, of course, members of the board of directors need to have expertise related to digital, related to strategy, because digital transformation is connected to both digital and strategic levels. In reality, boards that actually have a true expert. In artificial intelligence, for example, which is very popular right now, but boards that have a dedicated expert, they are almost non-existent. Or boards that have someone like Dmytro in the past, or CFO in a global company office. There are far fewer of those as well. And how can other boards where such specialists are absent possibly engage in
digital transformation at the strategic level?
There is no way, because they don't have that kind of expertise.
Maybe in startup boards such people do exist. So, if the business is directly connected, if digitalization and digital transformation are, let's say, the key to success for a particular organization that is directly connected to its product, in other words, a company sells online products, then in that case, digital transformation is essentially the driving force behind everything, the main driver of it all. As for companies where digital transformation changes the traditional business, like classic distribution, then I think such companies can bring in such a person. That is, they may not be on the board, but there is always a mechanism to involve the person, either for auditing a project, or for reviewing and analyzing terms of references, or for selecting a contractor, or all of the above. So, in principle, this resource is available to boards. The question is, if we are digitalizing an existing traditional business, then because there is such a person needed on the board, what do you think? Or could it be outsourced?
Now look, here's the effect. We understand that any change is perceived, it's psychology, it's stepping out of the comfort zone. If we're talking about digitalization, even if we're just talking about digitalization and not even digital transformation, which implies even deeper, more profound changes, that will also provoke resistance. If there isn't someone on the council who understands and can at least translate from IT language to business terms, or look at the possibilities from a business perspective and explain it to everyone else, then will happen. Because people will be afraid, both the board members and the CEO and the team members. Was everything working so far? Good, then let's not mess with it. It's IT, we don't understand anything about it.
Well, let's take a standard situation. There are owners who understand digitalization, but of course they can't fully be leaders. When it comes to digital transformation, there is top management, which of course to some extent is familiar with digitalization, but also cannot be a leader in digital transformation. If the board also lacks such expertise, external expertise is brought in, outsourcing or a consultant, but the people who are supposed to create the strategy and be involved in its development, they lack that kind of expertise.
I think it should be key company's IT director. One of my personal expectations from the IT director is to come with proposals for optimizing business processes. First and foremost is digitalization, if we're talking about automating processes. This person, in my opinion, should be within the team. The IT director should constantly propose options and options that are emerging on the market to optimize one function or another. And the same person can manage the implementation process and deal with all the biases, that is, the resistance that inevitably exists within the team. In my opinion, this should be done by someone from within the team.
I would like to add that I believe members of boards of directors have no other choice. Sooner or later, they must become experts in digitalization. They have to learn, they have to look at examples of digital transformation in other companies in order to build their own experience.
I would like to support this point because I fully agree that there is no other way. All of us, absolutely everyone, all involved in digitalization, we use smartphones. Well, we do something there, even if you've never used all the features, but we do something. Household appliances, you use them too, you do something. I'm not saying this to imply that it's not very difficult to be involved and know some basic things. Even when it comes to artificial intelligence, because one of the stereotypes, this is IT, right? No, I don't understand anything. And that, in my opinion, is what has hindered the development of some companies for decades. Later on, there has to be some kind of IT leader, but well, it doesn't work like that. A large company can afford that, but a small or medium-sized company can't always afford. They might call someone an IT director, but he'll also be reinstalling Windows, supporting users, and handling 35 other tactical tasks. This also stems from someone somehow not having a basic understanding, including at the leadership level, why it is important, why cybersecurity matters. These are supposed to be obvious things.
But in a case where there's no such leader within the team, I would still consider looking for an external person, either on the board or on demand, but someone who has experience specifically in this industry, in the digitalization of this particular industry. That's important.
Besides that, there are actually a million ways. To succeed, there are probably a million or even more options available to fail, and there are a lot of traps. And if, for example, there is no IT director, or again, the IT director, who is that? Is that a sysadmin? Or what is the core expertise of an IT director? Is it support, or a sysadmin, or implementation and integration of IT systems? What are we talking about here? We need a full-fledged chief information officer, someone who truly has both a global and strategic perspective. Just like, for example, an HR director, because an HR manager is one thing, but a chief, HR is more global. So this global strategic vision must be present in the chief information officer, because there are many pitfalls along this path. For example, recently Armen and I were on the board of one company where sales are conducted through the website. And when we were discussing the success criteria, among those criteria was the number of visits to the website. That's very good if the company is well known and people visit its website. That's very good, but how does that affect economic efficiency, finances, or additional sales? People visited, read about it, it's a good company, we know it. So probably in order to avoid such traps, that is, the criteria or KPIs that are set, those KPIs that do not lead to or confirm the achievement of the goal, such traps can exist. In order to avoid them, to define these criteria correctly, probably, there needs to be a specialist. An IT person or a CIO, for example, should not only understand systems and the IT side, but also the business side.
All departments have to work together. IT needs to understand the business, just like others do. But other business units also need to understand at least a bit of IT technologies, because without this kind of synergy, nothing will work.
I really like what's happening now. In many projects related to artificial intelligence, ROI, return on investment, is being mentioned more and more often. We remember when it all started, It was a hype topic, a trendy topic, and everyone started investing money, not calculating costs. The added value that this implementation of artificial intelligence was supposed to create, just to be doing something related to AI. And in fact, if we talk about the implementation of artificial intelligence, which at that time was just at an early stage, that's probably exactly how it was. But now economic indicators are being mentioned more and more often. Owners, stakeholders, and top management want to see ROI. And in order not to fall into the same traps as with clicks during the dot-com crisis, it's important to be cautious. From the very beginning, such projects need to be focused on understanding why we are doing this, what we expect to achieve, and how we will measure success or failure.
It seems to me that usually when it comes to artificial intelligence, it is currently used more for optimizing certain processes, for example, generating texts or creating presentations, analyzing something. But the question is, where is the added value there? Does it even exist? You can more quickly grasp something or see some highlights from a large text that is long and difficult to read. But where is the business solution that artificial intelligence creates? Well, in those projects, in the projects I'm currently involved in, we have one project that remains on the shelf, which could actually impact added value. But I think this isn't just about working in Ukrainian businesses or the work of the boards in terms of digital transformation. I think the whole world, in general, is waiting for a breakthrough from artificial intelligence, where it starts delivering added value to certain projects. I would be glad to hear about such projects.
I would phrase it a bit differently. We're not waiting because even now with the use of artificial intelligence, a lot can already be done. For example, sales agents. For instance, if we're talking about the efficiency of call centers, it's already possible now if there is a recording of all the calls made from the call center. Then artificial intelligence analyzes it, converts it into text, compares it with the provided script, and then gives recommendations on where you or someone else did something right or wrong. And it's not like that a sales employee did something right or wrong. This already exists. There are two types of usage here. The first is document analysis. We use an external interface to artificial intelligence. Or I can ask it, give me some advice or analyze the text or write something. And the other is when we talk about using artificial intelligence within our systems. This is a closed system. It's a closed system, some kind of graph vector databases, because we remember that all the questions we submit to ChatGPT, for example, that information becomes public.
Or we upload some files.
That's why such an approach doesn't work at all for business. We're talking about closed systems in which this information that belongs to the company does not leave the boundaries of the company.
Colleagues, are you aware of any case in Ukraine where the use of artificial intelligence, for example, helped a company increase its sales?
When a company talked about implementing artificial intelligence agents to improve sales efficiency, they implemented it in several stages. Here's how it works. At that time, they didn't yet have accumulated statistics, but let's be honest, aside from artificial intelligence, a human physically wouldn't be able to. Listen to all the recordings, analyze them, and provide recommendations. We need to think about how to calculate this increase in efficiency, but it works. I'm sure it works.
It's optimization, after all. One person can do it, two can do it, three can do it. Not the entire call database, for example, but a representative sample. They'll be able to cover the 15% who will be speaking.
These are additional people.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's some kind of process optimization. Roughly speaking, will reduce a photo. How does that help the company move from 9th place in the Marlet to the first one?
In this specific case, we are improving the sales efficiency of all sales employees, all of them, and that affects the final sales. If it works, they perform better, they sell better, they communicate better, and more clients enter purchase funnel and reach the end of this funnel.
We've now touched on one of the problems related to the fact that here's a technology, for example, in this case, artificial intelligence, which we're discussing as one of the options that can be used for digital transformation. But the demand for the internal stakeholders in the company, they can't articulate how this technology can be leveraged to improve their operations. Exactly. And again, they don't have the expertise for this. And probably artificial intelligence, like digitalization or digital transformation, is an expertise that is a must-have today and going forward. Absolutely. That's why, by providing training company staff in these technologies, of course, projects will emerge that will lead to greater efficiency and productivity, including improved sales and other areas as well.
I agree with you. This expertise can be acquired, and that's true. And for the board of directors as well, they also need to acquire this expertise. It's not something that was taught once to someone, whether top management or employees. And the more we know, the more expertise there is in the company, the faster we can say, okay, this is the solution. Let's calculate, let's try this and this and this. Because if there's only one person in the company on the board of directors, or it's the CEO or someone else, that's not enough. This should be a basic competency, just like knowledge of fundamental IT technologies such as security or development and so on.
Another important issue, an additional trigger that all of us are facing right now, is the war and the business risks that arise due to the war, including both personal safety and business security. Of course, all digital technologies help avoid keeping all employees in one place in a single office. And to be honest, I'm a bit surprised by companies that try to make all employees come to the office so that they are there from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., especially top management. If something hits that building, then that's it, it's gone. No more top management, no more business at all. That's why I believe that, on the contrary, it's precisely through the use of digital technologies that we need to anticipate such risks, meaning enabling hybrid work. It may come with certain risks. What has been your experience with this kind of work?
By the way, about a week ago, I was talking with my colleague, and I asked about office attendance policy. And they were doing something interesting. They believe that from time to time, the team should get together because many people have changed. Some left, some were newly hired. But what they do is they say, okay, you don't have to go to the office, but once a week, for example, your team should meet somewhere at a cafe, spend some time together to get to know each other, to understand one another better. Because a lot of people have changed due to the war, and people don't even know each other by last names, but they don't know what the person looks like. This is one of those cases where an offline meeting is needed. That's how it goes.
If I were to talk about digitalization as not a tool of core business, meaning not something that affects sales, but, for example, in working with personnel, it has now had a very strong impact on the labor market and the shortage of people in certain industries. And digital tools are really great at helping to onboard a new person, to introduce yourself, to properly present yourself as an employer, to find this person, to show in online sources the kind of information about the company that sells the company, that creates a desire in the person to join this team. Then the adaptation of this person. We are currently working with a great system where the entire adaptation process is structured in stages, where HR business partners can literally monitor online how a particular newcomer is progressing, what stage they are at, where there are issues, where they need to step in, help, and so on.
Is this the company where this is the CIO? Yes.
And this really helps to work with the employer branding throughout all the cycles of the HR process. That is, from search and recruitment to retention and development of the person. And since, in fact, not everyone, but many people don't gather in offices, it's very difficult to do this offline, especially when the company is spread across different regions. So online tools have a big impact on this. They really help.
By the way, do you use some kind of platform? Yes. How did you come to a decision that you would use this particular platform? Someone had to come forward with such an initiative. That's the first thing. And the second question, someone had to describe all the adaptation processes, break them down into sub-processes, and document them so that they could later be digitized. Who did that, and who did it in your case?
In our case, we did it jointly with HR. And we started with the fact that we basically needed to have an understanding of these stages, and we needed to structure the employee journey. Just like there's a customer journey, there's also an
employee journey.
Employee journey. There was a newcomer, a beginner, and first came the understanding that this process needs to be structured. And we were pushed toward this by the market itself, because we understand that every person, every new team member, even an applicant, is now worth their weight in gold. And we have no right to be inconsistent in process, whether it's recruitment, onboarding, or employee development. We risk losing that person. And only after that, this online platform simply became a tool to support that. That is, first, there has to be a need, a demand for structuring business processes, for those specific business processes that were either weak or completely non-existent. When there is a more or less consistent understanding of what should follow what, and what in principle should be in place as basic hygiene measures, then comes the understanding of tools, how it can be done in a way that is effective. Because everyone understands that, for example, a person needs to be trained, especially in a company that provides technical knowledge, meaning a person needs to be trained. But when the situation around is such that it's very difficult to move between regions, very difficult to gather people from all over the country in one place and do it regularly, that's when online tools come to the rescue. There are still some aspects that need to be done only offline, because people love people, people want to work with people, to see people, but some very important processes that are
time-consuming, we moved online, and that helps. What could be the next steps in the development of digital transformation at the strategic level? For example, you and I will soon be taking part in the strategic planning of one of the companies where we are on the board. How do you see this attachment to the overall strategy of issues related to digital transformation? How can we anticipate this and incorporate it into the company's strategy, the one we'll be working on, this particular part?
Well, some things are already there. We've already started, and by that, I mean digitalization or digital transformation. There's CRM, a new website, a new approach to attracting clients through that, and so on. Even what we discussed, the use of artificial intelligence to more precise meeting the needs of our clients, is part of the digital transformation that, in my opinion, should be included and become a part of the company's strategy.
I think that these digital tools of digital transformation, sorry for the tautology, should first be organically proposed and then implemented as a response to the uncomfortable questions from the board, but rather how to optimize the key business processes within the company. If a company is engaged in distribution and sales, then the key process is the sales process, which is likewise divided into certain stages. There's, say, lead generation, initial contact with the client, warm, cold, lost, and so on. At each of these stages, something happens with the client. The question is, for example, how to take a stage of the funnel, like lead generation, and what can be automated there. And then different answers to this question start to emerge. And then, if the board together with the owners sets this kind of framework, this is our key business process, and we want to have it flawless compared to the competitors. That's why at every stage, both the board and later the execution team must, at this point, look for any opportunities, all the niches where any process, even sub-processes, can be automated. And then everything comes together from that.
And for that, there needs to be internal expertise.
And for that, there needs to be internal expertise or an understanding, for example, of how competitors do it. Very often, if there is no internal expertise, but we see what the competitor is doing, we ask ourselves the question, wait, they are doing something? Can we do the same? Do we need it? How can we do it? That's not always a good approach, because it's a bit like copying. Just because a competitor did something doesn't mean it was the right move or that it actually worked for them. And many people, understanding the hype around the topic, try to replicate it. So this also needs to be approached quite critically. But again, at the core, these are the key fundamental business processes of the company. They need to be transformed from the perspective of digital tools. So I'm just giving a long answer to the question of whether this can be some kind of attachment to the overall strategy. I think it should organically be an answer to the question, how can we become better in our core business processes that enable us to grow and generate revenue?
All right, colleagues, I have another question for you. As current or former CEOs, we talked about access, but another fundamental aspect, which is the flip side of digitalization, is, for example, it's very simple. This is data backup being done at all, and how regularly? How do you control this, or in the companies you have managed?
And probably, where is it stored?
Where it is stored, yes.
Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the company where I was CIO at the time completely switched to a cloud service and cloud storage for all data. And there, on the infrastructure of this cloud service provider, this cloud data storage, there is a backup that is a separate backup somewhere on physical media, for example, on a drive. We did not create.
So in other words, your backup was on the same platform with the same provider who provided you with the cloud.
It was provided as an additional service.
And separately, did you back it up somewhere else to a different cloud? How did you manage that? Was it done daily, hourly, once a week?
Well, it all depended on the specific database, because the company I worked for dealt with different databases. They were updated at different intervals, and accordingly, the risk of data loss varied. In some cases, it was more critical, in others less so. So in some cases, it was done daily, in others weekly.
By the way, Sergiy, did you ever test the recovery of that backup?
No.
No? All right. Armen, how was it for you?
We also have cloud capacity, where the backup is stored, but I don't know how often it is done, what kind of databases are archived, and how often. I've written down this question and will definitely follow up on it. It's actually very important, because there are many things you just take for granted, assuming they're supposed to be there, because how could they not be? They just have to be. But for such critically important things, additional oversight is necessary. I think this is part of digital security, and digital security should be part of the BCP plan. One one way or another. Because it's what helps the business keep moving forward, not come to a halt. And proper backups as well as secure data storage are part of that plan. And maybe it's even worth asking the question, does the company have such a plan?
Well, that's going pretty far. At least a backup.
For the viewers, BCP stands for Business Continuity Planning. That is a plan that provides for measures to ensure that the company, despite all possible force majeure events, obstacles, natural disasters, wars, that the company continues to operate.
Yes, protection to ensure the continuous operation of the company. And by the way, this is not just an IT thing, it concerns the entire business.
Yes, well, maybe we'll just pick time to talk about this separately.
This is a great topic, and the role of boards in BCP planning
Could be very important.
At the very least, an initiation. Yes.
All right, colleagues, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. It was very interesting for me personally, and I hope for you too.
Armen, thank you. Sergiy, thank you.
Thank you. Shall we do the summary ourselves or ask ChatGPT to do it?
ChatGPT, because why should we do this?
Okay, if we're doing the summary, then let's maybe go over the main points of today's conversation. Here are the key ideas we discussed. Digitalization and digital transformation are an inevitable path of development for any business. First of all, relevant expertise in digitalization and digital transformation must exist at the top management level, at the board level, and possibly at the ownership level. This expertise can be supported through outsourcing or consulting, but the basic expertise must be embedded in the mindset. It can be reinforced. Let's put it that way.
I would add that an important stage is self-implementation and working with the feedback from the staff who are supposed to use these digital tools. And here, the internal resource plays a major role. That is the internal top management, either the CIO or the IT director, who must work on implementation and on involving the employees who are supposed to use these tools. Let's go deeper into that case, the one Dmytro mentioned, SAP.
Yes, you already mentioned the expertise. Basic IT expertise as well as security. From a cybersecurity perspective, this expertise must be acquired if it's lacking, definitely at the level of the CEO and top management across all departments, regardless of whether it's marketing, sales, HR, and so on. Nowadays, it's simply impossible to live without it.
And probably it's very important to establish the right criteria for evaluating the success or failure of digitalization or digital transformation. What are we focusing on more? Are we focusing on return on investment, on creating additional value from implementation, or potentially on internal efficiency, cost-cutting and other such things?
In general, yes, any project, including what we're discussing in terms of digitalization, must go through this justification for feasibility.
Well, and we said that this is still digital transformation and digitalization are simply the tools that are currently on the table, are very popular with many products that support it, but ultimately it's a derivative of the strategic plan, of the goals, of the owner's ambitions. Today, it is the most optimal path toward overall business happiness, if we can put it that way, which is sought by the team, the board, and the owners.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this episode on the Board of Directors channel with Sergiy Bulavin. See you on the channel.